Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to be watching this. I hope you're all having a good day. I also hope that for next semester I find a new opening, but that's neither here nor there. We're going to talk about some of the basics of causal arguments today. Again, please remember that I always operate under the assumption that everything is an argument. And even if you're telling a story about this happened to me, it's an argument that I am worth listening to. Today, we're going to talk about cause and effect. This argument, this thing, caused all of these other things to happen. One way to write a cause and effect paper is to begin with the cause and say that it leads to effect A, effect B, effect C. We start with a cause and we look at what happens as a result of that cause. So, smoking cigarettes leads to lung cancer. If you eat soup that is too hot, you burn your tongue. And if you combine two hydrogen and one oxygen molecules, you form water. Cause, smoking cigarettes. Effect, lung cancer. Hot soup, burnt tongue. Cause and effect. Pretty straightforward. However, you can also start with the effect, and then you can talk about what are the causes of this effect. You're tracing everything backwards. Something has happened. This is what's caused that to happen. So, if we have, in a very retro pop sort of way, a woman slapping a guy across the face, this was the effect. This was the final thing that happened. And if we go to all of the favorite memes of all time, this was likely the cause. We are tracing things back from the effect to the cause. And then finally, you can go through arguments which move from one cause through links to effects. You have your first cause. That leads to your first effect, which leads to your next effect, which leads to, which leads to, which leads to. I know I talk a lot about being a former debate coach, but this was the argument I heard on a lot of negative cases or a lot of negative arguments. Use this formation. If we do what the affirmative says, that's the first cause. It will lead to X, which will lead to Y, which will lead to nuclear war, which will lead to the extinction of all humanity. I don't want to read about the extinction of all humanity with all of the prompts that we have talked about, but I do think it's important to understand that this is one way that some of those papers perhaps could be written. So, you have a flat tire. Flat tire means you're late for work. It means you lose 2 hours' pay, and because you have spent a whole bunch of money on Black Friday, it means that you eat ramen for the noodles all weekend because you have no money left for anything else. One thing led to another thing, led to another thing. You have an initial cause, you have an effect, which leads to a new cause, which keeps moving. Chain of events. I think it's important to remember with your prompts and with everything else, the chain of effects, the cause and effect argument, begins with questions. So, if electric cars replace gas powered cars, what's going to happen? It's a hypothetical. Several of your prompts are hypotheticals. How will the pandemic affect America's healthcare system? You have this no one caused the pandemic. You have a whole bunch of effects that can happen from that. Are we going to have different forms of insurance? Are we going to have new ways to treat long COVID? Are we going to ignore the next pandemic entirely and overwhelm the health system because of the way people reacted to this one? Whatever it is, you have a hypothetical here perhaps, but you have a cause leading to multiple effects. And will decreased consumer confidence lead to economic depression? We've got inflation, we've got people saving money, we've got this decreased consumer confidence. That's an effect. What's going to be the future effects? Will it be depression? Will it be something else? I think it's important to understand that things are never, especially when you're writing all of these papers, they are rarely ends unto themselves. So you are going to link it to other arguments. We've got baby boomers reaching retirement age. It's going to depend on the definitions, but what are the baby boomers? What's retirement age? What's going to happen to that? Or because of that, excuse me. And then what are the effects of inadequate sanitation on a community? Okay. We want to make sure that everybody stays healthy. We want to fix the sewer system. We want to make sure that the water treatment plant is working. And so we want to have these proposals to make sure that we pay for the water treatment plant. We're going to look at inadequate sanitation, inadequate water treatment, and we're going to look at what does that do to the whole community. And because it does X, Y, and Z to the whole community, we should pay for this because it's cheaper than having inadequate sanitation. It's a rationale for proposal. It's always going to be linked to other arguments. And I think we have to understand that it is rarely, if ever, simple. What are the effects of social media on teenagers? Well, was the user a victim of bullying? That's going to have a different effect than if the user never encountered bullying. Excuse me. Was there dating and was there revenge sort of things posted about the person because of dating? Is Instagram different than Snapchat? And are both of those different than Twitter? And, is TikTok somehow different than all of them? And is social media part of the gaming hobby? Does that differ than if social media is used just to hang out and talk with people or just to keep up with folks back home? And is social media different if one is using it as a job? You're trying to be an Instagram influencer. Does that make things different? What are the effects on teenagers? And all of that ignores some of the big questions. All my questions here ignore some of the big questions of what does it do to learning habits? What does it do to attention spans? What does it do to any of those other things? All of these things I think are important when one looks at questions like what are the causes and effects? What has happened? What causes it? It's rarely going to be simple. I believe that it's important to look at, and this comes from the textbook I used last year, most of this is going to be probable, not certain. And certainly the hypotheticals that I have on the assignment are probable. And unless you are Nostradamus squared, I don't think any of you are going to be able to predict with certainty what's going on. Just because there's not a single compelling cause doesn't mean the argument has failed. It means you're showing complexity, and the more complex the situation is, the more you have to work to untangle things and make things simple for the reader. And so always remember your goal is to reduce the complexity, and your goal is to make the relationship as clear as possible for your reader, even though it may not be a perfect situation. There are several types of causes that I think we need to take up. Number one, sufficient. It's enough for something to occur on its own. So my example on this table, if you have a burned hand, because you touched the hot stove. The stove was hot, you touched it, you burned your hand. Nothing else needs to happen. Necessary. Necessary is required for something to occur, but it may need other factors. Gas is necessary for my 2010 Impella to start. However, if there's no battery, that full gas tank doesn't mean anything. And likewise, if I have a fully charged battery but an empty gas tank, it's not going to work. And neither of those are sufficient without good spark plugs. Okay, I can't start my car without any of those, but each of those is necessary. They are not sufficient, but they are necessary. Precipitating. It causes some changes. All right, so the pandemic was a precipitating cause of all sorts of changes in people's lives. Lightning strikes cause forest fires. It's a precipitating cause. Proximate means that we can see right away that X caused Y. If we have a blizzard, schools across the Dakotas and Nebraska get closed. It's a proximate cause. It's immediately visible. On the other hand, a remote cause is separated by time and distance. Somebody designed the building poorly, so the roof collapsed 20 years after the building's constructed. It's a remote cause. And finally, there's a reciprocal cause. It leads to an effect which reinforces the original cause. Consumers wanted a better cell phone. The company produces a better cell phone, and now consumers demand a new and improved cell phone. I'm doing a little research into comic books, and one of the things is that comic books are read predominantly by males. Some of the reasons for that may be the way female characters are drawn. So we don't draw female characters in a way that girls want to look at them. And so females don't buy comic books. And so we increase the ways that males want the female characters drawn, and we drive more females away. And it just keeps reinforcing that situation. It's a reciprocal cause. All of these types of things might be things to look at as you're writing your paper. Even if it's a speculative paper, I think you can take a look at all of these as parts of your cause and effect. I believe this is the last slide, so I hope all of you have a good day. I hope to see all of you in the next class period. If you have any questions, please remember there's always time in class to answer those questions, and I hope each of you has a great day.